Hi, my name is Martin Veach, Editorial Director of IDG Connect. I'm delighted to bring you the latest podcast from Moblicity Presents. It certainly promises to be a fascinating debate with IT leaders from some of the UK's leading law firms to share their views of the highs and lows of leading an IT team into and out of lockdown and what a return to the office may look like. The inspiration for this podcast, by the way, came from a virtual roundtable debate, which Moblicity hosted and named very nicely, I think, Legal in Lockdown. The discussion brought together legal IT leaders from the UK's top 100 firms, and we brought together some of the delegates again here to join us and bring to life some of the hottest topics from our discussion for our wider audience to enjoy. I'm delighted to be joined by IT directors Mark Parr of Holman Finnegan Willen, David Aird of DAC Beechcroft, Tony McKenna of Howard Kennedy, and CTO Ollie Bethel from Travers Smith, and last but not least, Shane Taylor, Moblicity CEO. So as far as I'm concerned, the $64,000 question we could start with is, how's it been for you? How have legal firms coped with lockdown? Maybe I could put it to David Aird first. David, what's it been like?
Hi, Martin. I think in general terms, the legal sector seems to have coped really well. From some of the surveys we've seen, from my own experience at DAC Beechcroft, and from speaking to peers, I think most people have transitioned to the whole working from home after the government introduced the lockdown pretty seamlessly. I think there has obviously been scrabbles for capacity, broadband issues, so it's not been altogether without problems and challenges. I think in general, certainly compared to other peers and other sectors that I talk to, that in general, legal sector's done really well. Should be proud of itself.
Absolutely. Any other reviews? Has it been, I know you're all going to say it's gone absolutely swimmingly because you're so well prepared, right? Is that the fact of the matter? Anyone want to fess up to...
I think certainly from my perspective, when this all started out, we thought at HFW, we certainly considered it was a continuity exercise. So there was a sense at the very start that we were reacting to this crisis and we might swing back to office working sooner. I don't think we considered for a while that it would be the duration it has been. But the big positive out of all of that is the infrastructure that we had underpinning our network and how that has managed. So notwithstanding local provision, and I think we all agree, ISPs have reacted differently, and we've seen ISPs around the world flex and swell, and in some instances fail. But from the network that I own, the bits of tin and the bits of wire that I manage have really sort of coped admirably, and that's been a sort of tick VG for IT to say, look, we had done the right planning in the background to ensure that we were able to make this. So it validated a lot of the decisions we've made.
Thanks for that, Mark. What about you, Tony?
I think we've done well. We had done a lot of planning. We've been responsible for business continuity and disaster recovery over the last 10, 15 years. And I think we've really seen it spring into action. I think there was the capacity challenge where we were all nervous. We never thought we would have all of our firm working from home simultaneously, but we've had pockets of it for a while. I think the thing that's impressed me the most outside of how technology's performed, how well our lawyers and colleagues have performed across the business. I think we have done things that we would never imagine possible only 6-9 months ago. And I think we've all been on calls with peers across the legal sector who have said that actually it's remarkable the amount of digital change that we've managed to land in the last 3 or 4 months, way more than the last 10 years. So I think I echo David's sentiment. I think we should be very proud of ourselves across the whole of the sector, not just the technologists.
Yeah, absolutely. And there is that feeling that some people are owning up to now, saying, maybe we're actually more productive, not less or about the same, but getting better at the job and not having that fun commute every day as well as a bonus. Ollie, what about for you?
Yeah, similar to the others on the call, we've been quite lucky. Investments made over the last few years to enable people to work effectively wherever they want to. That swung into action. I don't think any of us ever had pandemic down on the scenarios that we were planning for when we thought about some of the big systems upgrades over the last few years, but that has paid off. And as Tony was saying, actually, the adaptability of our lawyers and all of our business services teams has been really, really impressive. We've rolled out software very quickly through collaboration video conferencing tools that have been adopted so quickly. It's been fantastic. And actually, it's created a wonderful opportunity for us to be able to continue to modernize and upgrade certain aspects of what we deliver in a much shorter time frame than we ever had envisaged. And And if you ever wanted to have a fascinating experiment, it's been this. And I think there's so much we've discovered from it that we'll reuse as years go on.
Yeah, I'm sure we're all learning as we go along. But Shane, it must be an interesting time for you because obviously Moblicity is a mobile-centric type company. You advise companies on how to deal with working from home projects, mobile working, mobile productivity generally. As Ollie said, this has been the mother of all proving grounds, hasn't it?
Well, it's interesting actually because mobiles have been used less now than they probably have been in the last 10 years, arguably. So we've been evangelists of cloud and mobile for about 11 years. I think people on the call probably know I've been knocking on the door for a while. But this really, I mean, everyone was kind of on their journey to more mobile and more cloud, but this has accelerated it beyond all belief. And Mark mentioned BCP documents, but lots of people have planned for off sites outside of London with lots of desks. Of course, we've had a crisis and still we've not actually used much of our planning. So home working en masse, I don't think was on anyone's radar.
Tony, I saw you shaking your head there. Did you want to come in?
Yeah, I think that's an absolutely brilliant point around the kind of off-site DR and BCP capacity that we've all had these insurance policies for if the building floods or if there's an incident that restricts access to the building, then you have banks of desks and infrastructure and PCs that are spinnable up at the drop of a hat. And actually the first really serious long-term issue that I've been involved in 25 years of involvement in this kind of industry in terms of technology, we don't use any of it because actually the whole problem with the pandemic is you can't be near people. So therefore these things became really redundant really quickly. And I think there'll be a whole scale review, certainly from my side, around that provision, that insurance policy. Is it actually required or is there BCP? Now people will be working from home. Obviously, there's the kind of conversation around the new normal and how more prevalent working from home will be. But I think certainly the BCP plans will be rewritten and some of these insurance policies certainly need to be looked at.
I'm sure one of the things that we'll talk about a bit is how Corona has been an accelerant for things that were probably going to happen anyway. But it does feel like actually from our perspective, well, speak for myself, the timing of it in a way has been quite fortunate. I think had this have happened 2 years ago, it would have been a very different experience. But actually the last few years of mobile working, agile working, video conferencing, Zoom, for example, becoming the norm, it's meant that a lot of the systems necessary are in place. And actually, possibly the debate that we've all been having with VR committees for a while about such scenarios to say, do you actually think that in such a scenario you would go and use a dusty set of banker desks that are available in some part of the city? Or do you think people would actually just rather work from home? And actually, people do, well, obviously they need to, but I think from now on, that is just going to be the case. It's you're either going to work in the office or you're going to be working at home, and people can work really effectively. And I think that's been proven, whereas previously it would have taken a few more years for us to get to this point.
Yeah, you said earlier, a couple of you mentioned that you'd been delighted, maybe a little bit surprised, but certainly delighted about how the lawyers in your companies have responded. We do hear this phrase, don't we? The new normal, and we hear this, there's no going back. Drives me up the wall a little bit, to tell you the truth. But tell me in your own minds, several months into this process, what's your feeling for life like in the future? You know, hopefully we get a vaccine, we get therapies, and we get back to something resembling the old world. But you tell me what happens afterwards.
This is something we've seen with our dispersed workforce. So if I look at our Asia region and our Australasia region, we have had people go back in the office. And in Hong Kong, we went back entirely. So I think there'll be a sort of swinging metronome to this. I think it'll be a little bit of a sliding scale. There will be some regions that absolutely, because that's how the law business is done, will revert to that. I think that there's also an opportunity, though, for us to reset. And I know as we look at our London footprint, we're starting to think, do we need all that space? Do we want to offer more opportunity for people to work in a flexible manner? And certainly from my perspective, when I think of my team and how IT looks, and I start to meet that sort of digital skills gap, is do I think differently about how I recruit people? So do I share jobs? Do I go for 0.5 FTE to fill a role? Do I think more about somebody who might want to work earlier in the morning? Do I think about somebody who might want to work entirely from home? So we started to use the term home shoring. So it gives us an opportunity to perhaps be a bit more creative entirely about what we think about. The difficulty, and I know my the guys on the call will be in the same boat. We're trying to do a lot, certainly I feel like this, I'm trying to do a lot of this thinking about what the future can look like at the same time as BAU. I use the analogy, I fix the plane whilst I fly the plane. So that it's difficult to try and do it all and try and spin all your plates, but I think we've got an opportunity here to think fundamentally differently about what that offering looks like. That's as an entirety of an organization. It means for us as technologists is we've got to be at the forefront of that, because as the adoption of technology becomes more prevalent, and as the adoption of technology and competency around technology becomes ubiquitous throughout the organization, then we're seeing an opportunity to step change. Certainly that's what I'm seeing.
Nobody would have wished for this, but actually there's so many positives that can kind of come from it to do with work-life balance, technology we're using, all the things you were talking about. I mean, do any of you fear that?
Yeah, I'm thinking quite a bit about this, which is at the moment there's real equity for everybody joining meetings. And so how can we ensure that as people start to return back to the office, if you choose to work remotely, and I think absolutely people should, and I think it will become necessary in the war for talent, it's going to be important that you're not in any way disadvantaged by trying to join a meeting remotely. And so our role in that is going to be continued investment in the meeting room equipment, making it super easy for people to be able to join those meetings so that there is no friction that prevents or causes someone to have to drop down to dialing in the staff phone that's in the middle of the table. And then all of a sudden, again, external folks are at a disadvantage. My hope is that all meetings will, by de facto, start on Teams. And then if you walk into a Teams room, great, we'll turn that on and people in the room can join that, as well as people that are remote. But this equity, this parity remains for everybody remote. That's my big hope.
I think one of the things that I think we'll learn a lot more in August than we have learned in the last couple of months. We've got the working from home for all working well, and we've applied a lot of solutions for that and got them working well. Things like DocuSign and Teams and Zoom and all that kind of good stuff. I think come August, when we get people back in the office, that equity that Ollie talks about is going to be really interesting to see how that works. There's been a lot of move to open plan offices for collaboration over the last 10, 15 years. And the challenge with that is when you're sitting like I am in the office here today and there's nobody here, it's fine because I can have a conversation and there's no echo, not very much background noise. Trying to harness that video experience in an office where you've got a lot of buzz and social distancing so the meeting room space will be at a premium will be a real challenge for us to overcome. And I think that getting people to think about doing a lot more from their desk, looking at noise cancelling types of headsets and things like that are the things where we need to be planning for that and delivering that through August, because that will be for us, we'll be opening back up on the 3rd and we expect to see somewhere in the region of 10 to 20% of the people back in the office, notwithstanding what happened in the Far East, where pretty much everybody went back to the office and it kind of went back to normal relatively quickly.
Some interesting points from all three of the guys there. I think, Tony, one of the things, we've been flexible and agile working in some of our offices for a while. So there are ways around it, the furniture designs, the soft things, architecture above people's desks that dampens the sound, white noise generators. So you can have that best of both worlds whereby you can be literally probably on a headset, to be fair, but then person 3 feet away can't really hear what you're saying and things. There are ways to do it. I mean, Mark made an interesting point as well, that we talked about the metronome. We were talking about this today, that you get people that saying things will never be the same and other people saying it will, as Mark said, overseas it's gone straight back to normal. I'm probably somewhere in the middle, but someone said to me today that they think the pendulum will go one way. Some people will rush back to the office because it's like a novelty and they haven't seen their friends and colleagues. Then they'll probably be like, well, hold on here. I was really enjoying the no commute and all the rest of it. Now that I can go to the odd restaurant, have the odd meeting, I know I can do that and I've got the safety of that. I actually do want to go to this new normal of somewhere in between, rather than going all at home or all in the office. And again, Tony makes a good point. My worry for this is it is scheduling it all. If we all spend 3 days a week, let's say the people in this call, 6 of us, if we all only work 3 days a week in the office, or 2, for example, on average, we'll all be on different days unless we all deliberately say on a Wednesday, that's our hub day or our collaboration day or something, let's do all our meetings then. So, and is everyone going to come in on a Monday and a Friday? Or are they going to be at home on a Friday? Anyway, that's got flexible working. It's like the Mary Celeste on a Friday. So if we all do that in the space we've only got space for one team, we're going to have to schedule all that.
And you can imagine the whole organisation saying, we're going to do our hub day on Wednesday. And then if you're not in by 7:30, you're not going to get a desk.
I've already taken Wednesdays, you heard, Mark, so you're going to have to find a different day.
I think, interestingly, having been in the office for the first time today, part of the challenge is keeping that social distancing from your colleagues when you're actually in the office, because there's a small group of us in looking at planning for the third and looking at space. But it's when you're moving around or when you're just having that normal conversation, it's a lot more challenging, and you have to think about it because you're not geared to stand 2 meters away from everybody and have that conversation, even though when you're sitting at your desk, that's relatively easy to do because you design the furniture to meet that restriction. But just walking to get a cup of coffee or just sort of going over to somebody to have a conversation, it's going to be really difficult, and it's a real hard mindset. And I think that we technically can start that process, but culturally, that's a much bigger ask. And if we get to a blended situation where people are scheduling to be in and out on certain days and come together on one day, then that in itself presents its own issue. So it's going to be fun. I think August and September are going to tell us loads.
Yeah, and I guess we'll have to have staging posts and maybe sometimes go back and think again and learn as we go along. Let me ask you though, the legal profession is obviously one of the older ones and not always known as being the least conservative business in the world. What about culturally? What's the feeling at the senior level of organizations in the legal sector about having potentially a massive change in who's in the office, who's not in the office? Do you think there's a willingness? Technology is there, certainly, but is there a willingness culturally?
From the conversations I've had with the leadership at Travers Smith, I think the role of the office seems to have evolved. So it's traditionally always obviously the place where you go to do your work, but actually we've proven through this situation that productivity hasn't really had to take a hit. And so the role of the office has shifted where it's actually one of more about connections. So it's where you meet with your team, you build, you strengthen your relationships, you network. And as was said, maybe there are these hub days where there's a project going on, or maybe during a deal closing, the team comes together. But actually, once I've done my networking, once I've done my meetings, I know what I need to do. I can go back to my home office and I can work quite just as effectively there. I think the role that technology will have is providing those platforms that allow for close collaboration. So again, no disadvantage by being remote. You're still able to pick up on all of the small conversations, the quick dialogue that's going on. I think that's going to be key. But again, I think the leadership at Travers Smith is thinking quite carefully about what the role of the office is in the future so that we can support people being able to build and maintain connections.
The problem with law firms, I think we'll find, or certainly I've seen in law firms and from speaking to people, is unlike a normal company, which is generally command and control, this is what's happening, we're now going to be working this way, done. Law firms are very collegiate and quite democratic in many ways as well, so people sort of connect in and opt out of a lot of it. So, I think, as Ollie said, we as a business are very in about our employee engagement and the benefits of this new way of working to the employees, business benefits as well, flexibility, etc., etc., etc. But we will find pockets where people, unless someone's in the office, they don't believe that they're working, or if they do a certain role, they have to be here or there. And I think that will be difficult. As I said before, we've done quite a lot in this agile working thing, and we had to spend quite a lot of time with certain teams. And even now, I suspect some people might be thinking, well, we managed for a while, but it wasn't perfect. I'd far rather my secretary, my assistant, my whatever it is sat next to me. And I can just say, there you go, photocopy this, grab me that. And not having that ability will be difficult for people, even though they've proven that it can work.
And having that expectation that IT are going to be there to provide the white glove service that they would have previously expected. Yeah.
It's quite interesting because presenteeism is fantastic in law firms, as we all know, and therefore is presenteeism done through the digital media. So everybody's double checking that you're online at 8 o'clock in the morning and still online at midnight. So that may still be going on. We don't really know how people actually operate culturally. I think that there are a couple of things that we need to think about as the business leaders. And we at Howard Kennedy, we are absolutely clear that we are being led by the government, the science, and indeed what our colleagues across the business are feeling. So we have to remember that not everybody has the luxury of having a spare room where they can set up an office and have that home office experience. So there are plenty of colleagues across the business who need the office for more than just a place to go to chat. They really need it because actually to work really effectively, they need that type of environment and that DSE type setup. So we need to think about that as business leaders. And the other thing is there are certain jobs like trainees and apprenticeships and things. We are very keen on bringing apprentices through the technology team, but it's really difficult to start an 18-year-old from their bedroom as an apprentice, whereas we've done that really successfully in the office. So I don't think it's as clear cut, and I think leadership in law firms, and certainly our leadership team, and I know the guys on the call are the same, we've got our eyes wide open, the broad spectrum that we need to accommodate and take advantage of the opportunity.
There's a really valid point around assumption here as well, isn't there? So you'd assume that the sort of young associate or somebody who's new to their career would be the one desperate to work in a new way. The reality is they're in a flat share and they don't have the space, and they're working off their lap on their bed rather than from a desk. And actually they need to be in the office because they get a better provision. And it's understanding that sliding scale of difference as well, I think, is really key here.
I was just going to add to Tony's point about the apprentices and things like that. So IT technicians, apprentices, that type of thing, we're not talking about time-served plumbers. However, someone coming in with a badge or an MCSE or a certificate means nothing. It's, learning on the job, speaking to people, following people. The Sophia, the skills framework, from the BCS talks about people assisting, following all these different levels. If you do not have someone there, and we've seen this because we've had a couple of apprentices join the team just before lockdown, and they've really suffered. I've spoken to them personally because whilst they can Skype people, whilst they can use all the modern tools, it's not the same as being sat next to someone who, when you're hovering and you're getting a bit nervous, can say, "You okay? Do you need a hand?" They can't see you 24/7, and not just for IT, for the junior lawyers as well. Supervision, not from we don't trust them, not from a presenteeism, but just from being there to lend a help. Even just the reassurance. Sometimes it's just sitting next to someone. You can do it yourself. You just want to say, "Is this right? What I'm going to do here?" And you're much less likely, I think, to call someone and bother them. And that's one of the great benefits of a lockdown at the moment. I'm getting a lot less phone calls, but it's and I'm being bothered less. On the other hand, that's a minus because I'm feeling a bit lonely and I'm not as switched on and attuned to what's going on in my team and what's going on in the business because of that. So it's pros and cons.
Yeah, that human factor is an interesting one, isn't it? I know Google, for example, was saying to its employees that they set aside budget for things like buying office chairs and decorating the office environments. You can work in hopefully a more optimal way as well. But I was going to say to you, obviously you're learning as you go about how employees want to work, and I'm sure you're researching how they'll want to work in future as well. But you tell me, have there been any big surprises, either positive or negative, through this experience, things that you would have thought, I would never have ever factored that into my thinking or planning earlier or not?
Competency, and I've mentioned this earlier, the competency of our users and their ability to sort of fault find themselves when they realize they have to, that's been impressive. So, my service desk guys have seen a huge reduction in service desk calls and emails because users are taking much more time themselves now to figure that out. So that's really, really good. That's a huge positive. The negative for me, the thing that really strikes me is this desire still to have to print, and people at home who are desperate to print off reams and reams of documents when there are tools available that could make that a lot easier. That's been a real frustration.
Can I just build on that, Mark? I think that desk side white glove support that's disappeared. Obviously, we don't have people running around all over the country. I think it'll be interesting to see how that competency sticks when people come back into the office. And that's really incumbent on us to make sure that people just retain that level of self-sufficiency and that level of natural digital curiosity that I think they've developed over the last few months. I think it's been superb. That we are very fortunate. We deal with very clever people, and sometimes we mollycoddle or cowtail to some of that far too quickly. I think we can take from this a tangible demonstration that actually people are more digitally literate and more naturally curious. We just have to signpost it and maybe educate them in a different way and think more outside of the box around TED-style talks and simple consumption-based learning rather than dragging them into a training room and preaching at them.
Yeah, tech support's a really interesting one. Our volumes have stabilised to around pre-corona levels, maybe a little bit below, but actually the phone calls have dropped off dramatically, and it's largely by email now, which suggests that actually the urgent tech support requirements aren't there as much. And to Tony's point around training, one of the things we did early days into lockdown was we had these daily tech tips, and I never thought that I'd be using GIFs as much as I do in my daily work. And we created these short, literally like 10-second little how-tos daily, and then we just did them as a GIF, embedded them in the email. So in Outlook, they pop up and they cycle. They've been brilliant. They've gone down so well, and that really just short, punchy. Right, this is how you make a call. That's echoed by the fact that we rolled out Skype for Business voice video conferencing with one email. Don't think I'd have ever been able to roll out technology that fast, and so I just hope that in the future I continue to do that.
I think that's a brilliant point, Ollie, about rolling out technology. We've been on calls before where we're talking about removal of physical desk phones and moving completely to soft phones and things like that. These are the conversations, Martin, that I think all of us around the table knew that we should be having and were having, but how you get that change in cultural behaviour was just really difficult. So therefore, when you're in a situation where you can now say to someone, here, we're going to provide you with a digital phone so you can have your phone experience at home, it feels like you're giving them something rather than taking something away. And it's always better received a gift than actually when you're taking something away.
Absolutely. David, Ed, I know you're involved in well-being at your company. I mean, I think one of the strange things for me through all of this has been talking to colleagues and former colleagues is people react psychologically in all sorts of ways to this being cut off from regular contact. Some people absolutely love it, some people hate it, and a lot of us can see swings and roundabouts in the whole thing. Have you, as a group, being asked to do more mentoring to understand the sort of psychological needs of the user base within your organizations? And I know, for example, Nomura, who we talked to on a previous podcast in this series, distributed well-being app and made sure there were regular updates that weren't strictly work related. Have there been actions like that you've seen that have either worked or not worked?
Yeah, we've done a tremendous amount in that area in the last couple of years. So we had already done a huge amount of, kind of alluding to there, I'm a mental health first aider, for example. So we rolled out that program. There's about 200 of us in the firm that are mental health first aiders. We've got a whole sort of well-being, yoga, you name it. So what we did was move a lot of it online. So we've had quite a number of online sessions. We have yoga broadcasts from various people around the country, different health things, mindfulness things. So there's a lot going on. I think we've been careful with the managers to say, look, it's interesting, mea culpa. The first few weeks, I was on the phone just about every day to my team. Now that it's more like the new normal, I'm doing it less, but it's something I should probably keep up because I'm noticing people's energy, certainly mine, sort of comes and goes. My motivation, on days I'm a bit not motivated, I don't have someone else next to me saying, where's this, get that. So for me, myself personally, I'm having to work on that. So it's important, I think, still to check in with people. We had something we're trialing the team, which was in my leadership team. It was a sort of survey once a week. But we already were quite good as a team, certainly my leadership team, of just being open, saying, God, I've had a really rubbish week this week. And what we found was when people were voicing that, it wasn't a work thing. Obviously, as the leader, I was sort of, oh, goodness me, how can I help? But it would be childcare, it would be the parents, it would be the worry about school. But it just shows you yet again, that is people's lives. We talk in Beechcroft, slogan is a life that works. They play on the fact that you've got a personal life and you've got a work life, and we have to do both. So I think more important than ever, that is critical. Work is now somewhere where you live as well for us at the moment. So you have to kind of create that dividing line between, I'm quite good, 5, 6 o'clock, I log off. My other half, he works for a big insurance broker. He works a lot of long hours. He's in HR. So he doesn't quite have that discipline to say, right, I finished for the day. So I've had the benefits of saying goodbye to my commute into the Bristol office, which is 20 miles away. So I'm getting that. I can go for a walk, I could do whatever, look after myself, whereas he's just using that as more work time. So it's definitely something to be aware of.
That's a really good point, David, you raised about as leaders being open with your team and telling them, because I've had to have that conversation with some of my guys. There is this perception, isn't there, that the presenteeism has to be, well, you're at home, so log on at 7:30, and when I check at 8 o'clock at night, I'm expecting you to be online still. There's a little bit of that, but you've got to be. So I absolutely, to that point, have told my team, I'm trying to follow David's example and be strict. At 6 o'clock at night, I shut down, and I properly shut down my machine, because I find if I don't do that, it's very easy to just walk past my desk and go, I'll just have a quick look. And then before you know it, you spent half an hour there. So telling my team that it's okay to be strict, or that sometimes I'm not, and actually my energy levels are dipped, or I am feeling a bit fed up because I quite like going into work and seeing my friends and going for a coffee or a beer after work or whatever. But also there's a little bit here, isn't there, of we've entered into a new contract with our team. I'm having conversations with my leadership team, and suddenly somebody's daughter will appear in a call, or there's a cat that will walk across the screen or whatever, and you kind of go, well, this is a new contract that we're entering into with each other here. I'm opening up more to you. I'm showing you my home. You're sharing the same details. So actually, that allows us the opportunity to have a bit more of that conversation that says, well, how are you feeling? I'm a bit tired today, or I'm feeling, I'm a bit fed up with this, or I'm looking forward to the weekend because I'm going to sort of put my feet up or whatever.
Ways, don't we? We all work in different ways. First thing in the morning, you won't see me online. Normally I've got my iPad out, I'm doing some emails there, I'm eating my breakfast. So I am working, but I'm not working at the PC. We've always been quite flexible. I've got one of my heads of, he's got a family and things. He would often leave the office at 3 o'clock, go home, look after the kid, and then come back online at 7 to 8 or 9 o'clock. That suited him. The work get done. We've all been in this long enough that you kind of know, you trust people, and you kind of know from their output what they do. And law firms, of all things, when a lot of it is time recording, my God, if people are good doing their time recording, job done. That's it. That's the output they're looking for, which is that time recording. So it should be easier for us, maybe a bit more difficult for the techies, but to work an output rather than number of hours done.
I think every company that we deal with say they have a home working policy, but I think it's something like in the last 5 years, home working, people that work from home more than in the office, have gone up by 5%. So it was kind of, you had that facility, but generally speaking, it wasn't many people that really work from home. But now we've been forced into that, and people can see that the productivity and all the great stuff that we've talked about today, it's flipped everything on its head. And
also how you deal with that. Our HR director, myself, and our practice director had a session today. We have a home working policy, and we actually had some before this, home workers, 50 to 100 people. They are based at home, our decision, their decision, whatever. But I was saying I quite fancy going forward working 2 or 3 days, probably on average at home. Some weeks it might be 5, some weeks it might be 1, just depend what is going on. And some weeks I'm away to Spain next week, fingers crossed. I might work from Spain for a day. Does it really matter as long as the work is done? But at the moment, our thing is a policy. And I was like, look, I don't want to go through this whole formal thing, all the rest of it. Yes, I need to have a space. Yes, it needs to be, safe, etc. But it doesn't feel very flexible when I have to fill out a flexible working process and request form. So we're talking about saying, well, hold on, in this new normal, it is going to be a little more flexible, in which case we kind of expect you to be at home in Spain, here or there, or, whatever. It doesn't really matter as long as it gets done and it's safe to do so.
I think it's really important that we recognise that we as the leaders need to do that and need to show that, because the difficulty is you said, Mark, we cast a long shadow. If we're in the office 5 days a week telling people not to come in at 8 and leave at 8 at night, but we're doing it, then people just react to you and they follow you and they follow your shadow. So what we need to do is be even more demonstrable in our behaviours and really follow that, to set that example for others to follow. I try to be religious about a couple of hours in the middle of the day. So I know we're busy in the morning and tend to pick up busy in the late afternoon. So taking 2 hours between sort of 12 and 2 and trying to be really religious to my own team and say, no, that's my downtime. I'm having some downtime, or maybe go for a run or whatever. That changes their thought process, because then they think, well, actually, that's really okay because Tony's doing that. And I think we really need to take that on board as leaders and really make sure that we're demonstrating that that's absolutely the right thing to do.
But it's funny you say that. That's really worked for me, that I've put lunch in from 12 till 1. I've told my team, look, if we need to move that for something important, we'll do it. But do you know what? It hasn't been moved. Rarely has it been moved. And I'd kind of go for a run, and I've never been doing that because stuff in the office, your routine gets blown apart because people walk up to you and talk to you, which is fair enough.
What lockdown has proven is that technology is no longer a barrier or inhibitor to how people want to work. And that's been always used as an argument, I think, in law for many years, that actually I can't work as effectively for a long period remotely. And so now it's really down to it's a people point and trust. And hopefully through this lockdown period, that trust has been earned, that people can now just work however they need to.
Absolutely. I do wonder as well whether some CIOs, IT leaders, will go the extra yard. And there is a bunch of new tools around now that are specifically designed for measuring what users think of the jobs you guys are doing. There's a company called NextThink. I don't know if you've heard of them, or SAP bought a company called Qualtrics. And you know, these ones where you might think, oh, these young people who want to work from home, as you mentioned earlier, Mark, and the old guys will want to stay in the office, might be completely the opposite. Who knows? Or we're all human beings. It's probably somewhere in the middle. Are you thinking about formalizing some of the ways you measure the service to the end users?
Two things there. When you're in the early stages of your career, being able to work alongside people is so important, because you get the chance to build those relationships. Once you're into maybe sort of the middle phase of your career, actually being able to work remote, there's less of a disadvantage in that. So I think we'll probably see more of those at the early stages of their career wanting to be back in the office a bit more, also because they're less likely to have their own private space where they're working. And Martin, you mentioned the feedback point. We've implemented a tool called Temper. Our service delivery manager put that in, where we get this sort of quick feedback for any tech support, a sort of thumbs up, thumbs down. That's been really, really useful for getting a sentiment on tech support and on training. And actually, I can see how we could roll that out in other areas.
I do think that feedback is massively important, and we do need to regularly listen to feedback. Most of us will do sort of temperature checks around the service. After 3 or 4 calls, somebody will get an email request. But I think a more formalised way to understand how people want to work. You know, we've done a number of surveys, and I know the rest of the colleagues across the industry are doing surveys and trying to get that. I think it's going to be a regular thing, an evolving thing. I think David's absolutely right. It's not a policy. It's a way of working, and it's a cultural thing that actually you just need to set the tone from the leadership and demonstrate that you're living and breathing that open style of working, and sort of take labels off it and just try and make it just the way how we do business around here is that we work in a way that is output focused and extremely flexible.
Like Ollie, we do, you know, if you log a ticket, then we'll, you know, ask you afterwards. We do IT surveys and things. What I've always struggled in this law firm, or this is my first law firm, but people seem to suffer in silence a lot. They don't log things, they're very busy, and then eventually they blow their top and they send you a 5-page email, or they grab you in the corridor for 3 hours to tell you how rubbish this, that, the next thing is, instead of telling you at the very beginning of the, you know, of what was going on. But we're looking at, you know, performance management stuff and quality metrics, and it could even be that those systems you mentioned to measure, even when they're working at home, how fast things are taken, how long the experience is, so we know at the same time the user does, so that they're not suffering in silence. That's the one area that worries me.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, we've only got a little bit longer. We've got 5 minutes. You know, the big learning experience for me over this lockdown has been how every single person I meet is an expert on Zoom conference calls these days. And no, I do not want to join your quiz, by the way. I'm sick of them. Any closing thoughts? Maybe we could go around the group and tell me something that's either surprised you, delighted you, or something that's a bit quirky. The gentleman from Nomura last week was very interesting about talking about creating packages potentially for more home working. You know, obviously a lot of broadband capacity, but things like well-being apps as well, and things like creating environments where you're optimally working rather than suffering through. Appreciate any closing thoughts. Maybe Shane, you could lead us on the way out.
Yeah, I think it'll be interesting to see what happens over the coming weeks and months around what IT deliver, manage and pay for as far as home IT is concerned. It made me think the other day, I was talking with a customer and they were saying that they've had people trying to claim back milk their cereal and coffee.
Nothing would surprise me.
So, if we're at that point, when are people going to kind of say, well, home broadband's obviously a topical one, whether you're having issues with it or, is it my responsibility? Is it the company's responsibility? So I'm just interested, where do you draw the line really, or is it going to be expected that IT now extends into the home?
Absolutely. Mark?
This is front and center at the moment because it's exactly the conversations we're having. At what point do we stop? Because my budget, funny old thing, is being reviewed constantly at the moment as we move through this, and I'm protecting my budget as much as I can, but it's not a bottomless pit, although a lot of people think it is. Lots of challenge. Office furniture is a big one, isn't it? If I provide you office furniture and then you damage yourself, am I at fault? So we're having all these sort of conversations, very much so. The biggest surprise for me, though, I'll just add this, and it sort of echoes Ollie's point from earlier, is we've taken this opportunity to accelerate some deployments of technology that would ordinarily have taken a lot longer to do. So there seems to be a real appetite to accept that tools that we are providing are there to help and support the business. And that's been really quite exceptional.
Absolutely. Ollie?
Reflecting on the last 4 months, it could have been a very difficult time for tech in legal. From my perspective, I've been immensely proud of how my team has stepped up and how much we've been able to deliver and actually seized the opportunity. And I hope that we're able to sustain the momentum now, because it feels like we're meeting the expectations for the pace of change now from our legal teams. There's still a lot more that we can do. I definitely would mark the lockdown through chapters of intense conversations about home working kids, to intense conversations about Zoom, and then into intense conversations about Wi-Fi. I'm in the Wi-Fi chapter right now. And as I say, being responsible for a network of which I have no control is never an easy place to be.
Absolutely. Very lots of familiar nodding and chuckling going on around here. David?
Yeah, I think like the rest of the guys, the Wi-Fi situation, I think at the moment it is interesting. I think for me, we've been talking a lot about, where are people going to land with this? And I think, unlike the normal law firm thing, which is let's see what everyone else does, I think genuinely, probably we're all just waiting to see where will people land, where is individuals going to land. Who knows, in 6 months' time, we might all be saying, why do we work from home? It's really been damaging our mental health. That was awful. We're all humans. We want to communicate with each other, go around in troops and all the rest of it. So why would we go back to that? We just don't know where we're going to be. So I think we have to keep nimble. I think we have to keep fleet of foot with regards to that. I think there is a question around, for me again, because I brought up at our partners meeting today, home broadband, that sort of thing. It's a small but incredibly important part of things. And what we get from our users is Netflix works okay. Yeah, but that's coming down, not going up. Up's normally a lot slower, plus the Wi-Fi, plus it's buffered. So we're getting almost into these arguments with people because we keep pointing the finger as IT people at the broadband. And I've been trying, like probably the rest of the guys, to keep my hands off it, but particularly when it's your exec and others, and they keep saying that Skype's breaking up or Zoom, whatever, how long can we keep hands off from this? And we're talking about putting some standards at the moment. If you homework, you have to have a desk at this height. And do you have broadband? Yes. I think we should be saying yes, it needs to be this speed. And in the room that you're operating in, the Wi-Fi signal needs to be that good to avoid these sort of issues, because it's just going to be perennial. Or we will have to adopt all these connections, which to me seems like a whole world of pain. Maybe we outsource the whole world of pain to Shane. There you go.
Last but not least, Tony.
I echo Ollie's sentiment about team performance. I think across the industry, all of the technology colleagues, business services colleagues, and legal colleagues have stepped up massively and really demonstrated the capability that is in the legal industry. I think it's fantastic and everybody should be immensely proud. I think we should take a couple of things away. One is more confidence in our colleagues to be digitally inquisitive and self-starters and capability to learn. I think Ollie's point around dropping technology onto people's desks via an email with no training has been remarkable, and how people have adapted to working on Teams and Zoom and other technologies has been fantastic. The one big frustration that I've got is the whole concept of fake news. The hype around Zoom at the start of the kind of lockdown, and then that kind of trough of disillusionment as everybody said it's not safe, and clients were dictating you can't use this and use that and use, and actually it was all fake news. I think people need to take a step back and recognise some monumental successes from some pretty small companies to support global collaboration. Would be worthwhile seeing somebody saying something positive about some of the things that have been achieved. But fake news, real frustration for me. Immensely proud of everybody.
Absolutely. Well, at least those of us on the call will raise a glass for IT, because there have been some pretty heroic episodes out there amidst all the day-to-day. Lots of fist bumps going around virtually here. Hey, listen, I really enjoyed the call. We really could have gone on for hours longer. But thanks so much to everyone on the call. And this has been another Moblicity podcast on Legal in Lockdown. Thanks so much for listening in.